Okay, welcome everybody to kind of a recap of our tier list yesterday. If you were joined in the live stream, thank you so much for joining in. Thank you to everybody who donated. It was just a fantastic time. There were a couple of technical hitches and a couple of things that have made me come back and not re-record it, but go through our choices in a video. Originally, I was planning to take that live stream and just fully redo it into a video, recut it and everything like that. But a couple of different factors that I won't get into now have made it so that I'd rather come back and go through our choices than just edit the video itself. So if you'd like to go and rewatch the entire stream, it's there from yesterday. But if you'd like to join me today, we're going to go through, and I've got a little blocker here, not showing you all the choices or all the tiers or anything like that, so it's all blocked off for now. But all will be revealed in terms of our PSVR2 rankings this year. Some of these justifications will be kind of silly. They will be based purely on vibes. Some were based on polls we did on the stream yesterday. But thank you again to everybody who joined. If you do feel like subscribing to the channel as well, we're in this end of year push. We're about 14,200 subs right now, which is a ridiculous number. But any more support is always appreciated. So thank you to our patrons and YouTube members who are on screen right now. And with that being said, let's start us off with Z tier. So we decided in Z tier, there is one particular game, and that is, probably you guessed it, Grand Rush Highway VR. This was actually an embargoed tier from a little while ago when I made this tier list, and essentially I changed it into Z tier to specifically put Grand Rush VR here, because it's probably the worst game I've ever played on PSVR 2. So just above that, we're on to D tier. So we shall reveal that now. That comprises of Firewall Ultra, a game that had a lot of promise at launch and a lot of things to live up to, and I was actually away for the launch. I was at a festival here in the UK, and I'm kind of glad I was, because I missed the entire shit show of the launch of that game, but I came back to everybody kind of, well, abandoning it, and I see why. Unfortunately, the devs also shut down, and the game no longer gets support. Therefore, it's in D tier. Across the Valley as well, could have been a really cool farming game, but I just found it really shallow, and ultimately the kind of point-to-point movement as well wasn't really for me. Travel the Words is in a similar one there as well. It's a crossword game, and it works at that, but the visuals aren't great. The crosswords are very easy because it's aimed more at kids, but I'm sure if you had a child on the VR headset, if they were old enough to use a VR headset, they would enjoy it. Project Wingman is also there. There are only a couple of VR missions that are compatible with PSVR 2. The game doesn't look great and also had a load of problems where it wouldn't even start when the game came out. Therefore, it's down there in D tier for me. Okay, on to C tier. First and foremost, Sugar Mess. This is a perfectly competent shooter, but it is a bit more kid-oriented for me. Not really my thing, again. Did enjoy my time with it, but I hope the devs go for something more mature in the future that I perhaps can enjoy a little bit more. Skyclimb is also a bit the same. Decent mechanics, a little frustrating at launch, but it has been ironed out a bit. But very kid-focused and not really my thing. Infinite Inside had a lot of potential, and had some breathtaking visuals and a fairly cool story that was very interpretable, but perhaps it was a bit too interpretable at times, because I had no idea what was going on, and it kind of left it up for you to decide what you wanted to take away from it, which sometimes, due to the nature of the story, was nothing. O-Shape is just a hole-in-the-wall style VR game, works perfectly fine, but it's nothing incredible. C tier, Shaven Stuff is a bit of the same. Just shaving people and styling their hair works perfectly fine as is, but isn't something that's really blowing me away, even to the scale of B tier. Resolplay is a bit of a sports reaction trainer, which works fine, but there are better options out there in my opinion, which we'll get onto in B tier. Twilight Zone VR, it's a very rough around the edges game, constrained by budget in a lot of places, but has a lot of cool ideas, hence why it's not in D tier. One level in particular has you record a bunch of lines at the start of it, and then, unbeknownst to you, actually makes the NPC that's chasing you in the level use those lines back at you, which is kind of freaky. D-Day Enhanced is also in C tier. Not many people really play this one, I wish they did, but I had a load of fun in the testing sessions. I just wish the final product kind of shaped up to be something really popular, which is a very tough thing to kind of ask for in the VR space. Visually, it's not the most amazing thing, but the developers really cared about this one, and for me, it's kind of on a higher C tier. Peaky Blinders The King's Ransom is a game that I had a lot of expectations for. I'm a big Peaky Blinders fan, and it delivered on some things and really didn't deliver on others. The gameplay itself wasn't that great, but it was cool to have a drink sitting down next to Tommy Shelby, with it officially voiced by Cillian Murphy. That was pretty cool. Gorn is just not at the caliber of any other VR fighting game on PSVR 2 to this day. It was good back on PSVR 1, but the port to PSVR 2 left a lot to be desired. Not really a fan of this one nowadays. Survivorman VR is a bit the same story as some of the others in this tier. Very rough around the edges, clearly restricted by budget, had a lot of grand ideas and couldn't really pull off all of them. There were some good moments to be had here, but some things in the levels were genuinely a bit broken. Zenith The Last City, if it was still supported and active, would be higher than C. Unfortunately, it isn't anymore, so it's sitting in C tier. Kill It With Fire VR has one gimmick, which is killing spiders and finding them around the levels. It does that fairly well, but that's all it does, so C tier. Behind the Frame, another game that has some really cool ideas, but not quite the chops to pull it off. A little bit janky, not the best visually, but the story was really nice, so it gets a C tier. Moving on to B tier, starting from the bottom, Rainbow Reactor Fusion is a game that I actually did quite enjoy for what it was, but it was a little bit more kid-focused than what I really would have wanted, and the dev's next game would be a little bit more appealing to me than Rainbow Reactor. Tiger Blade is quite fast-paced, the difficulty ramp-up felt a little bit sudden, and it is an on-rails VR game, which held it down a little bit for me, but it is quite frenetic and fun, a little bit like Vendetta Forever. Corridor VR is also in B. It's got some really cool ideas with puzzles, with a mirror in the center of the room, which lets you swap between essentially little dimensions, mirroring the same room on either side with different items. The dev has also taken a load of feedback on board, which is great, and while it didn't blow me away completely, it was pretty fun. Operation Serpent, fairly competent shooter made by a solo dev. Not the best looking, but quite enjoyable. Thief Simulator, like some other games in this tier, reach for a lot of things to try and do, didn't quite succeed in all of them. The AI NPCs aren't the best, the driving feels a bit janky, but the breaking and entering, which sounds very dodgy now that I say it out loud, was pretty well done. System Critical 2 is another solo dev project. Similar to Operation Serpent, some great ideas here, some good fun to be have. Lets you down a little bit on the visual side of things. There is a third game in development exclusively for PSVR2 though. Clean Sheet is basically like Resil Player, but with a bit more to it in my opinion, because you have actual animations for the players that are hitting balls against you to react to, and a couple more things to do. Doctor Who: The Edge of Time, I had a lot of hopes going into this game. It didn't really live up to too many of them. There are some great ideas here. Fortunately, it sits in my least favourite era of Doctor Who, at least modern Doctor Who anyway, so it kind of had the odds against it from the start, but despite there being some cool settings and references in here, there wasn't really too much for me to enjoy because, again, it was limited by budget. Speaking of budget, Budget Cuts Ultimate has had a resolution boost since I last played it, and honestly sits at the very high B tier here. It's above a lot of the rest, but ultimately it's a bit like Job Simulator where it came out a little while ago and you can kind of feel that in some of the mechanics, but it still has a lot of fun and stealthy action to be had in it. Cactus Cowboy Plants of War is in B tier. It's a free VR game, I believe the original Cactus Cowboy is anyway. It's another solo dev project, a little bit similar to Operation Serpents, etc. But for a free game, I'd honestly recommend it. The developer's also, I think, just been hospitalized as well, so the best wishes to them. That sounds really scary, and I hope they're okay. Green Hell VR, I did just revisit with the co-op update. That video will be coming out over the next week or so. I just find it a little bit low res, a little bit janky. I think they fixed some of the open world loading screen problems that we had, and it now has co-op, which again makes games a lot more fun in VR, but still sits at B tier for me. Survive is a lot of the same, not that great visually, fairly janky, but fun with friends to shoot zombies and survive in its open world. Cosmodread is another solo dev project. This one is a tier above some of the others though. Despite it lacking in audio design a little bit, there are some really good scares to be had here. Some indie but great sci-fi visuals, and a good roguelite loop. Dead Hook is kind of similar there as well. Another roguelite-esque game, a bit more like Doom this time. Again, bit of jank. Not the best looking game on the headset, but a lot of violent fun. Cooking Simulator wasn't really my thing. I'm sure somebody who absolutely loved cooking will probably find themselves really at home here and it will sit at like A tier, but for me, it's a B tier. It was competent, but not something I really enjoy. Job Simulator, a game that is showing its age nowadays. It's one of the first VR games that was the best thing to kind of put new players onto, to sell them on VR interactions. I still do really like it, but it's a B tier game for me. Very Bad Dreams, a PSVR2 game that had a lot going on, another one that was constrained by budget. I believe this one might also be a solo dev or small team. Some great ideas, a bit like the Twilight Zone. In my opinion, pulls them off a bit better than the Twilight Zone, but only by a little bit. Journey to Foundation, a bit too much exposition in this one for my liking. But for those of you people who love a lot of world building through a lot of talking and interaction with other characters verbally, this one would probably sit at A tier for some people, as it is very competently made and is at high B tier, I think. Space Docker VR, a game that does space docking very competently. You're like a space trucker, essentially, has some really cool PSVR2 camera features. I'd recommend this one to people who like space flight sims. It's one of the best on the headset, but it is very difficult. And if you're not into that sort of thing, I'm semi into that sort of thing, it can get a little bit boring a little bit quickly. But if you're really into your in-depth handling spaceflight physics models and stuff, Space Docker VR is a great one for that. For me though, it sits in B tier along with Mixture, which kind of felt a bit like Moss, but without some of the fun tone that Moss gives me. Moss isn't on the list, by the way, because I haven't played through 1 and 2 all the way on PSVR2, only on other platforms. That will happen eventually though at some point. But yeah, Mixture kind of was a bit like Moss, but without a lot of the charm. But it did have some genuinely good moments to it and fun gameplay, but doesn't quite reach the heights of that original Moss Book 1 and 2. Not for Broadcast also sits in B tier for me, but again, the highest bits of B tier really. It was fun to kind of manage broadcasts on the go, feeling the pressure of having to get the cuts right on TV, and also making some narrative choices that were really cool. Some of the visuals, especially outside the window near you, were a little bit iffy, and I found there was only so much they could do with the gameplay as the game went on. But I still think it is worth a go if you like the sort of live TV broadcasting nature of this sort of thing. Broken Edge I'd put, again, at the highest to B tier probably. A PvP fighting game that has a lot of really cool mechanics to it, a lot of classes to choose. But again, isn't one that really kind of grips you with any sort of progression or a need of really wanting to go back into the game again and again, but it is fun from time to time. 4VR Bowl is a game that honestly I would just recommend if you have friends to play it with. It's a bit like Wii Bowling, but for VR I did find it a little bit easy, like the actual bowling was pretty simple to get a strike, a bit like Wii Bowling again. But it has some cool environments, and it's kind of a stand-in for games like Rec Room because we just don't have those yet on the headset. The Wizards Dark Times Brotherhood, a very high B tier game again I think. In co-op it's pretty fun, there are a couple missions to do and a full campaign, and you can cast spells and feel like Doctor Strange. Epic Roller Coasters, exactly what it says on the tin. If you like roller coasters, you'll like this game. That's about all it does though. Paint the Town Red VR, just a brawling simulator. Pretty violent, pretty fun, but ultimately not that deep. Paper Beast, resolution isn't the highest on this one, but if you play this game, especially under the influence of anything, you're going to feel like you're floating. It's a really surreal experience. After the Fall, really fun with friends, a little bit janky. The gunplay doesn't feel quite as good as Vertigo's later games, and doesn't use DFR, so it looks a little bit blurry, but is a genuine fun time to be had there. Jurassic World Aftermath. As a big Jurassic fan, I was looking forward to playing this one. It did let me down a little bit in terms of budget and how ambitious it was, because it wasn't too ambitious because of the lack of money I guess they couldn't put into it. The AI for the raptors felt pretty decent, but yeah, Jurassic game could be so much more than that. Still, a simple platformer does it very well, but it's about all you can get out of it. I think it has multiplayer now though, but the game is genuinely really fun, good haptic use as well in that one. Starship Troopers Continuum could be an A tier, but it's just a bit of a mess right now, unfortunately. In terms of visuals, in terms of bugs, and in terms of like kind of the issues that me and Electrical have found playing over the last couple of days, yeah, it's a tough one. Utility Room is the next one. Really surreal, not very long, the runtime's the main thing that keeps this one down, but if you are kind of scared of massive moving objects, like megalophobic objects, this is a game you should probably try because it will freak you out. Whitewater VR is also B tier. I just couldn't really get to grips with the handling model of the kayak. Didn't really feel like it pushed you far enough when you actually paddled. And some of the maps were a little bit too busy for me and felt like assets put together rather than the nice environments in other kayaking games like Kayak VR Mirage. However, this is a solo dev, I think, but there were some cool sights to see, especially on the Iceland level, so I'll give them points for that. Metropolis 2 Never Say Goodbye. Not the most VRAF game I've ever played, was quite a cool visual experience though, and the story was neat, so that sits in fairly high B tier. Umurangi Generation is a bit similar. You jump in, you take photos with your camera. This is a solo dev project as well. It's very stylized, some people may like that, some people may not. I sat it in B tier because I was kind of in the middle. I like the visual style, but a bit of it felt a bit too low budget, but again, that's something to do with it being indie in nature. Soul Covenant had some very cool ideas, but the combat was a bit too flaily for me. Just absolutely spamming a weapon over and over again, which I didn't really like too much. A bit like Skyrim VR. Masternoid, very simple, but very enjoyable in B tier, but there's not too much to it, but I did enjoy my time with it thus far. Happy Funland, didn't find it too scary, which was one of the main draws. The performance wasn't great at launch, but I think it may have been fixed. There's a lack of accessibility options, and the writing I just did not like at all. So, B tier. Big Shots, good fun, not too deep, not as deep as other VR Mac games that I played like Iron Rebellion, but it was, pretty enjoyable, especially in co-op. Shooting bugs is a good time. Stride Fates, pretty fun, bit janky. Its resolution is better now, but still not the peak it could be, I think. And the use of AI-generated artwork in some of their bits, I think it's AI-generated anyway, I don't want to be like throwing out false claims there, but that kind of put me off a little bit. Gonna add in B tier here, the Foglands. Forgot to add this one to the list, but I should have done. I think it came up as a hybrid game on a PSVR2 thing, so I didn't really see it. But yeah, it is there in B tier. They've done a lot of work to it to bring it up from, I'd say, like C tier for me. It still doesn't feel like it flows completely like without jank, but it's a lot better than it was at launch. They've done a lot to it, and the setting is pretty damn cool. Moving on to A tier, FNAF Help Wanted. The first game is genuinely scary, really, really good. Easy to put new players onto and looks really good in the headset as well. Barbaria, loads of content, didn't expect it to be as good as it was. I think it solidly deserves its place in A tier. Genotype, fun narrative adventure, lots of weapon variety, really dig the enemy designs as well in this game. That opening's really cool in the Arctic environment as well. Hellsweeper VR I need to revisit more, but it's sitting at A tier at the moment. They keep updating it, so it might move up to S once I play the new updates. Windlands 2 is sitting in A tier as well. I didn't like the tone as much compared to the first game here, but the gameplay is fantastic. The bow and arrow feels brilliant. The co-op is really fun, so yeah, I'd recommend that. VR Skater is a bit similar in terms of gameplay. It's really, really good. It's really hard, but it's rewarding if you get it right. And yeah, pretty fantastic game all around. Good soundtrack as well, but yeah, very, very punishing. Metal Hellsinger is a bit like Hellsweeper, I always get them confused. Really good soundtrack, loads of weapons to choose from. The resolution isn't the highest, but I still recommend it if you like those Doom-like games. Runner is up there as well. Very simple idea, Acura style, very inspired by that sort of thing. Cool boss fights, cool enemies to fight, cool weapons, genuinely a really fun time. And I hadn't played it until recently, so thank you to the specific commenter who kept telling me to play it, because I should have done. Little City's bigger, lacks a bit of challenge, but I do like these sort of games where you can just experiment with the sandbox. I like city builders, looks fantastic, uses great headset rumble, really, really good game. Again though, doesn't really have too much challenge if you're looking for that sort of thing. Vampire the Masquerade Justice is sitting in A as well. I really enjoyed this game. The social screen does it really, really dirty though. It shows it at like 45 FPS, which looks horrendous, or something even lower than that. But in the headset, it's super smooth at 90, unreprojected. It gets a bit samey after a while, but the story's cool. And the gameplay is pretty fun, stealthing around and punching people with your super vampire strength. Garden of the Sea, bit like Animal Crossing meets Dredge sort of thing. You explore, you build. It's a really fun game. It kind of kicked off a stretch of really good games for me on PSVR2 at the start of the launch of the headset, which is like 2 years or so now. That's crazy. It's been out this long. It doesn't feel that way, but yeah, honestly, fantastic game. Another Fisherman's Tale, really great story. Puzzling kind of confused me and annoyed me a little bit, but the story, honestly, is worth it. Swordsman VR isn't the peak of VR combat, crashes a lot, especially in sandbox mode, but when I need to get some proper sword fighting in on a VR game that feels pretty good, especially with some of the other weapons, the axes feel a little bit off and the punching feels a little bit off, but the actual sword play, which is focused on, feels really good. It's just the package around it is a little bit janky in places. Drums Rock, I need to play more of. Could move up to S. I did enjoy it so far. Just didn't really feel like it flowed as well as some of the other beat games that I played, but it might move up when I play more. Song in the Smoke, I say it every time it comes up on the lists. I need to play it more. I have really enjoyed what I have played so far. The visual style is pretty cool, but I think I do just prefer more realistic looking survival games. But in terms of gameplay, this kind of clears green hell for me completely so far, but again, need to play it more. Red Matter 1 is sitting there as well. Decent puzzles, a bit short for me, and it kind of shows you all of the cool sites at the start of the game. There is some at the end, but that middle stint is a little bit more enclosed, but still a really, really good game. Sea Smash VRS has quite a few game modes to choose from, but a lot of them feel a little bit samey, but it is pretty much the best racket game on PSVR2. Really cool style, music, gameplay, yeah, good time. Same goes for Ultra Wings 2, one of the only flight games on PSVR2. Hopefully that'll be changing soon with the release of Aces of Thunder, but we'll see. The flight model here is really good. Do not let the kind of, not simple graphics, but more cartoon style graphics deceive you. Yeah, it's a good game. Ghost Signal is also there. A really great roguelite on PSVR2. Fits in the Stellaris universe really well. All the UI and the voice acting and the sounds kind of feel like they fit. The combat is a bit simplistic, but I do quite like it. I'm also going to add Vendetta Forever here in A tier as well. I'm just going to superimpose that in post. Didn't expect it to be so fun. Inspired by many movies that I love. Really liked it. Carrying on in A tier, Trombone Champ. Sits very, very high up there. Really fun. Some of the levels are incredibly difficult for me, but it is a really strong start for Flat to VR on PSVR2. Just a really polished release. Human Fall Flat VR is also a really polished VR release that I didn't expect. It's just so much fun, especially with friends. Had such a good time playing that. Compound also sits in A tier. A really good roguelite. I wish the AI for the enemies was a little bit smarter, but I did really enjoy it too. Snow Scout is an A tier easily for me. Some people didn't really mesh with this one, but I really, really did. The narrative was great. The choices you can make over the radio to respond were really, really cool. The skiing was fun. I'm glad they're pursuing that skiing mechanic for their next game, which is 90s Extreme Skiing. Can't wait to see where they go with that. Breaches is also there in A tier. Again, resolution isn't the highest on this one. I wish it was a little bit higher, but it still looks pretty good. The gameplay is very, very sweaty and difficult, like Rainbow Six Siege, but really fun to squad up with friends. Overdark isn't quite at, say, Madison levels for me, but it is A tier. Genuinely spooky, good puzzles, enjoyed it. Arizona Sunshine 1 and 2 kind of group together a little bit for me, and that is the Arizona Sunshine remake I'm talking about there. The writing I don't really like too much. The gunplay feels a little bit, I don't know, wooden in places, but in other places feels really punchy, like with some of the pistols. The gore is fantastic. The resolution isn't the highest, but there is a lot of content and fun to be had with both of those. Saints and Sinners Chapter 2 Retribution did have some game-breaking bugs for me, unfortunately, and that was like way after the review embargo was done. I just bought this game out of wanting to buy it, and I didn't really feel like the story gripped me too much. I may need to revisit this one. It could move up to S, but last time I played it, there were just quite a few game-breaking bugs with enemies not spawning where they should have been, and also the same non-game breaking bug of just a flare spawning in my van for some reason. Every time I spawn in, it's just there and I can't get rid of it. It's always there. It's little things like that adding on with the bigger, more like actual game breaking bugs that make this one an A tier and not an S tier, but apart from that, it's pretty damn stellar. Hubris is also pretty good. Very good visual showcase. The gunplay and the gameplay is a little bit shallow, but I still think it's definitely worth a play and it's a good game. Writing is weirdly sexual though, very odd. Among Us VR is great if you've got a lobby you can fill up with friends. Otherwise, it's a little bit tough because there are so many squeakers, but I still enjoy that game from time to time. Finally, it's time for S tier. So, let's start off with the front three. First of all, we have Saints and Sinners Chapter 1, very much like Chapter 2, just with a little bit less content, but a lot more polished. Honestly, if Chapter 2 was a bit more polished, it would be up there, but there are some actual game-breaking bugs that stopped my progress with Chapter 2 that sits in A tier for me. Pavlov, absolute classic on PSVR2, best shooter game probably in terms of just having fun and content-wise. Yeah, definitely sits there. Cube VR is also at the top, fantastic looking game. The crafting loop and building is really built for people who love creative mode on Minecraft, and I hear it looks brilliant on PS5 Pro as well. Beat Saber, VR classic, enough said. Red Matter 2, just a crazy visual showcase. Everybody needs to see this one at least at some point or other. Legendary Tales, load of content, fantastic game, easy S tier. Kayak VR Mirage, some people may not agree, but I absolutely love this game. Visually, it's stunning, and it just makes me feel good when I play it. Walkabout Mini Golf, loads of content, loads of DLC you can buy as well. Fantastic with friends, maybe the easiest game to pick up on PSVR2 as well, because it simply is mini golf. Madison VR, the scariest game I have ever played, I would say. Absolutely terrifying, visually brilliant as well. I need to finish it, but it's in S tier. Subside, another brilliant PSVR2 game that looks fantastic, just came out recently, yesterday in fact, I want to say, in terms of on the PS Store. You should go and play it if you enjoyed Kayak VR Mirage, and does have some progression elements to it that Kayak VR Mirage doesn't have. GT7, possibly my favourite VR game and favourite racing game of all time, sits up there in S tier. Sushi Ben, fantastic, witty writing, great fun, S tier. Resi Village, easy S again, AAA VR, blew me away. I wish I could wipe my mind and experience that again for the first time. Switchback VR, we used to be in B tier, now in S tier. The visual upgrade and the Horde mode has pushed it up there. Fantastic experience, especially if you're a fan of Supermassive's more recent work with the Dark Pictures. Arcade Paradise VR is a must-play for people who love arcades and management-style games. It's right up that street and is great fun. Synth Riders, a beat game that is pretty much on par with Beat Saber, and the experiences on that game as well are something to behold. Synapse, or Synapse if you're American, best use of PSVR2 features possibly of all time. Brilliant game. Phasmophobia, some may argue with this one, and while there are bugs, for me there have been no game-breaking bugs at all. It's just been little janky things at launch, and most of those are solved now. The only bad thing about the game I'd say now is the resolution, and the frame rate can get a little choppy, but that's only in certain instances. For the most part, it's completely fine. But it is the most fun I've had on a multiplayer game in such a long time, and it genuinely is a well-built and good game as well. Horizon Call the Mountain always hold a special place in my heart. Really love it. AAA PSVR2 game, was one of my first introductions to PSVR2, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Propagation Paradise Hotel, despite the ending that ended really abruptly and really pissed me off, the game is pretty fantastic and actually really scary. Metro Awakening lived up to my expectations for a Metro game in VR and definitely deserves that S tier spot. Puzzling Places, there's no better puzzle game on PSVR2 in my opinion, in terms of like really relaxing puzzle solving, great sound design, fantastic experience, also has multiplayer now from what I hear. Crossfire Sierra Squad, after all the updates and playing it in co-op recently, it just is so much fun. The reloading could still use a little bit at work, but that's not enough to bring it down from S tier for me. There's so much content in this one for your buck as well. Max Mustard, fantastic platformer. Music's great. Story's pretty simple, but pretty engaging. The gameplay is so good. Deserves S tier. Demeo is a must-play for friends that enjoy tabletop games as well. Just really good fun. And quite difficult and challenging as well. You need to have a lot of teamwork. Vertigo 2, easy S tier. Extra S tier if you got a PS5 Pro because the performance is actually really good on that console from what I hear, but on the base PS5 it might be A tier for people who can't really handle dropping frame rates in certain instances, but for me, personally, that is S tier for me. I just absolutely love Vertigo 2. The only thing, again, that brings it down below other S tier games is that frame rate. It's just a bit inconsistent at times, and the lack of implementation of PSVR2 features, which I wish they would get onto. Okay, our final couple here, Behemoth. Fantastic PSVR2 game this year. Might be my favorite one that came out. Has awesome spectacle. Man, I just loved this game. It was so enjoyable. Even with my pre-release build that was a bit buggy, I still just got blown away with it. The Light Brigade, easy S as well, one of the best roguelikes up there with Synapse. It's really difficult at times, but feels grounded and fun. Ancient Dungeon, the multiplayer update is incoming on PSVR2, I think. But aside from that, one of the best looking games on the headset in terms of how smooth it runs and in terms of how incredibly sharp everything is, deserves that spot in S tier. Alien Rogue Incursion, despite some of the kind of issues that I had with it, still S tier for me. It lived up to that more action-oriented Alien game that I kind of wanted it to be. Maybe we can get a more stealth horror-focused one in the future, but for now, I think it is a good entry into that sort of genre. It is a part 1 of 2, though, but there is enough content in there for it to kind of justify itself. No Man's Sky had so much work done to it over the last however many years it came out. Constantly updated, hybrid game as well, just love it. Resident Evil 4, like Resi 8, simply pure bliss on AAA VR. It is so good to play, and won my game of the year last year for PSVR 2. Lastly, Into the Radius, one of the best games on the headset this year. Can't wait for the sequel in a couple of years when that gets kind of done and polished up and then put on PSVR 2. I will be there day one for that. Absolutely love Into the Radius. So, there we go. Thank you all so much for watching. There is the ranking. I will scroll up and down a little bit for you to see. The main thing we're focusing on is kind of up here with S, A, and B though. As the biannual tier lists go by, I seem to get harsher and harsher, so the more things will probably exit S and A and go down to B and C. But for now, that's where we're at. That's how I'm feeling. It's purely based on vibes. If you disagree, I completely understand. But thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you all in the next one.